In Tech Matters, the real and accelerating trend of cord cutting. Today, the Pew Research Center published a new survey of consumer patterns. They found roughly 1 in 4 people can now be called cord cutters or cord nevers. For more, I am now joined by Brian Fung, technology reporter for The Washington Post. Brian, let's start with those terms, cord cutters and cord nevers. What in the world do they mean?
Well, a cord cutter is someone who once had a subscription to cable or satellite television service who now doesn't. They've decided to opt for streaming-only services such as Amazon or Hulu or Netflix. And by that same logic, someone who's a cord never is someone who's never paid for a cable or satellite TV connection.
All right, that makes sense, of course. We want to get to that Pew study. Give us a little bit more detail about what they actually found.
Well, one of the interesting things that they found was that of the proportion of people that are cord cutters, that's roughly 15% of the American population, more than half that roughly half of them now no longer subscribe to internet service at home. So what they're doing is that they're taking their cellular service and using that as their way to surf Amazon and Netflix and watch videos that way. Now that's significant because it suggests there's a big population out there, or a potential population, that in addition to giving up their cable or satellite TV service, they could also be enticed into giving up their cable internet. And that would have huge implications for companies like Comcast, who offer pay TV and home broadband, but not cellular service.
What do you think about the impact for these companies? If more and more people become cord cutters, will they eventually have to scale back their prices? Will it have an impact on them in the long term?
Well, a lot of skeptics of cord cutting say that eventually, if you add up all of the services that you might want, a Netflix, a Hulu, CBS All Access, HBO Now, all of those services plus a traditional broadband internet connection could wind up costing you a pretty penny, about probably as much as you might pay for a traditional TV bundle. But when you factor in what some people appear to be doing, about 2 in 5 people appear to be doing away with their home broadband connection altogether and using simply their cellular service, that's a lot of money every month that you're potentially saving.
And if they're splitting up these costs, no matter where they spend them, will the companies eventually lose that demand and have to cut their prices to try to basically entice these consumers back to business?
Well, I think that a lot of those dynamics still have to be worked out in the marketplace. You see a lot of variation among companies, a lot of experimentation. Companies such as Verizon have launched streaming video services of their own. Comcast has also announced a streaming video service. It's unclear whether or not these services will actually take off. But what is obvious is that a lot of these companies are now tilting themselves to try and meet the demand of people who are increasingly getting their television over the internet as opposed to traditional methods.
And we know that the Federal Communications Commission is also paying close attention to this issue, especially a trend that's called zero rating. What is that, and why is it so controversial?
So zero rating is a tactic that some companies, such as T-Mobile, have been engaging in, whereby they exempt certain services like Hulu or like Netflix or Spotify from your monthly data cap. So you can surf as much of these services as you want without having that consumption count against your monthly data cap. And that's controversial because some tech policy advocates say that's a violation of net neutrality. That's simply unfair for smaller companies that are trying to compete against the larger companies that can afford to strike deals and partnerships with companies like T-Mobile. T-Mobile, on the other hand, says that what it's doing is actually good for net neutrality. It's good for the internet because it means that more consumers will be able to access the features that they want to access. Now, this is all subject to a big debate at the Federal Communications Commission, which has said it's going to be taking a very close look at some of these practices.
And the FCC sent a letter to people like AT&T, companies like AT&T, T-Mobile, and Comcast. What exactly does the agency want to know from these companies, and what happens next here?
Well, what we're looking at here is not the beginning of an investigation or any kind of enforcement action. The FCC is being very clear that it's trying to get these companies such as AT&T, T-Mobile, and Comcast to come in and discuss zero rating with them so that the regulators can better understand what it is that these companies are actually trying to offer, the problem that they're trying to solve, and what the FCC may or may not need to do in response.
And is that a lengthy process, or should we expect action quickly?
Well, the FCC has asked for meetings to take place by mid-January, so presumably anything could happen after that. But we're seeing that the FCC is very engaged on the subject and could be moving quickly on it.
All right, Brian Fung, technology reporter for The Washington Post. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.